Welcome back. In this third and final video of our series for this week, we are going to look at how we work with that MySQL data that we just created in a table and use it in our PHP, because it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to just sit there in that table. So this week, I am just going to have you pull up the data so we can see it. Next week and after, and as we move into more in-depth pieces of working with MySQL and into our final project of the semester, we're going to look at some different ways. But for right now, it's not really any fun for you to just get that table created and then what do you do with it? So we're going to look at how do we access our database using PHP and how do we pull up some information with it.
So the first thing that we need to do is open up a new file in a web editor of your choice. I am using Dreamweaver, so I'm just going to do a file new. I am going to select the PHP option just because it'll make this easier and start color coding things for me right away. I'm going to click create, and I'm just going to go ahead and save this file right away. So I'm going to do a file save as, this way we don't forget what we're doing. I'm just going to save this out into my desktop in a folder called lab9, and I am going to call this db_connect.php. Now the reason I gave it that name is because this is going to be for a document we are going to be using over and over and over again here for the rest of the semester. And you're not going to have to change anything on it. And really what that DB Connect stands for is Database Connect. It's going to contain our connection information to our databases. So it's going to include things like the username, the database name, and the database password. And there are a couple of reasons why it is stored in a separate file. One is security purposes. It keeps it as a separate file so that if somebody were to get into one of your main pages, even if it says to include that file, they'd have to actually get to this file in order to get to it. Now, the other reason is because we are going to be using this over and over again, so we don't have to retype it. We can always just save and move this document into the new folders that we are going to be using. So we have this file created. If you are in Dreamweaver, just like I am, we are going to actually need to delete all of this information. If you're using something else like brackets or Notepad++, then you will start out with a completely blank document, and so there will be nothing to delete. The first thing I'm going to do is just open up my PHP, and I'm going to click enter a couple of times to create just some spaces here, and then I am going to close up my PHP just so I don't forget. We are going to be, of course, working in between, and we are going to be creating some variables on this page. That's really the only thing that's going to exist here. And the first variable that I'm going to create is for our server name. When we were setting things up in MySQL Workbench, we had to use an IP address to put in our server name. Well, this is a little bit different because this file is going to exist on the same server as our database within our web hosting. Therefore, in this particular case, and I'm going to give it a variable name of server name, the value here simply needs to be localhost. It's all lowercase, it's all one word. This is what GoDaddy as well as many other web hosts use to identify that this particular database is located on the same localhost server. And let's not forget our semicolon. Now, the next set of variables, we're going to be doing 3 more, are all related to the information that I emailed you just recently with your database information. The very first one that we are going to be doing, I'm calling this one DB_username. Now, this is your database username that I just sent you. This is different than the username that you use to log into FTP. In my case, mine is simply my last name, so you will need to consult with your email just to make sure what yours is. The next one is the database password, and I'm going to be blocking this out, so when you see it, you're not going to see anything here. And this is the same. This is your password that was just sent in the recent email. And the final one that we are going to be doing is database_name. And this is the name of the database, not to be confused with the username. The username is part of the login. Mine is Isaacson -db. And we're going to end this with our semicolon, and we are going to save this document. There is absolutely nothing else that is going to go on this file, but as you can see, it holds the login information. In fact, if we want to, I'm going to put a comment up at the top that says this document contains the database login info. That just lets me know what this particular document is for. So I'm going to save this. We are actually done with this at the moment, but I recommend that you keep it open because we're going to need the name of this file here momentarily. The next thing we need to do is open up a new PHP document. So again, I'm working in Dreamweaver. I am going to save this one right away as well into that same Lab 9 folder. And this is going to go with that contact info table that we created in our MySQL database. So I am just going to call this one contact list. I am going to leave the HTML in place. Before we get going too far, I just want to let you know that I'm not going to be going super in depth on some of the things that I'm going to be showing. And that's only because we're covering this really quickly. I mean, for example, we're going to be covering the MySQL stuff here the next couple of weeks. So it's a total of like 3 weeks that we're covering this versus an entire semester's worth. So I'm not going to go real in depth onto some of these things. I will describe them in kind of broad strokes and give you a general overview, but you're going to have to just trust me with some of this. Everyone at this point should be familiar with a PHP include and what it is and what it does, because we have already in our earlier PHP work have been including that variables.php page. Well, we are going to do something very similar, but there's another command in PHP that's called require once. It's similar to an include, but instead of an include, which will, anytime it sees that command, will always try to include that file, even if it means multiple times over, the require once command will check first to see if this file has already been included, and if it has, it does nothing. If it hasn't, it goes and grabs it. The reason we're using this for this one is more of a security reason. We don't need to include our login information multiple times. We just need to do it once. So up at the very, very top of our page, prior to the doc type HTML information, I'm going to click enter a few times and give myself some space. This is where I'm going to open up my PHP, and I'm actually going to go close it right away. What we need right now is this require underscore once. Inside of the parentheses, then we are going to put some quotation marks, and we are going to include the name of that file we created. And that's why I asked you to keep the other one open. We want to make sure it's named exactly as we see it. So it's db underscore connect.php. And because it's in the same folder, I don't have to put any folder name. This should suffice. And this is a command all unto itself. So at the end, we need to make sure we include our semicolon. But this doesn't quite get us connected. All this does is it pulls in the login information that we need. To connect, we need to create our first variable, and I'm going to call mine con, which is short for connect. And in this, I am going to use a predefined PHP function called MySQLi underscore connect. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So what MySQLi connect does is exactly as the function name implies. It's going to try and connect to our MySQL server using the variables that we pass into it. Now, if we remember on our DB Connect, we created these 4 variables: server name, DB username, DB password, and DB name. Those are the variables we need to pass in this command. So I'm just simply going to copy this and put it in my parentheses. We are going to separate them each with commas. So I'm just going to keep going back and copying each of these. This way I am sure that that the names are spelled exactly as I had them on the other page. I don't have any typos. So I'm going to copy them exactly as I see them. And this should be our final one. So at the end of this particular command, I am now going to put in my semicolon, and this will go out and try to connect to our database using the credentials that we put in as the values for server name, DB underscore username, DB underscore password, and DB underscore name. We need to check to make sure that this is working. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to create an if statement that's going to check if the database connection was made. We're going to start out with an if statement, and then I'm going to use the not symbol. In PHP, not is an exclamation point. So if you remember back to ICT 103, where you worked on your Excel final project, in there you dealt with and, or, and not. Well, this is where we use something like not. So we're saying if there's not a connection, so we're going to use that variable from right up above. So if this doesn't work, we need to do something. So that's our condition. Then we need to open up the curly brackets and we have to put something inside of it. In this case, we are going to use a function called die. I know it sounds kind of harsh to say die, but what it is in PHP as well as many other software applications is die simply means kill the process. Don't go any further and report out an error. And so that's exactly what we are going to do is we are going to say die, and then we are going to say show the words connection failed. Right here we need to concatenate. So after the colon I have a space. I'm going to put in my quotation marks, and because I know I'm not going to need these quotes at the end, I just need the single one. I'm going to do the quotation mark, a space, a period, and then we're going to have another one of the predefined PHP functions called MySQL I underscore connect underscore error. And you can see it's coming up, so I am going to pull that. And then to finish our command, we need our semicolon. So basically what we're saying here is if no connection is made, kill the process and tell us why. So what I'm going to do above here is I'm going to make a comment and tell myself exactly that. There is my comment, so that'll help me, and that finishes the if statement. And if we remember, if the if statement is true, it's going to run that die command. If it's false, it's not going to do anything, and it's just going to go into our next step. Now, our next step is where things are going to start getting cool, because this is where we are going to start actually trying to pull the information right out of our database. So I'm after the if statement. I'm just going to put another space here, and I'm going to make a comment that says what we're doing, and it's pull the information from the data table. And now we're going to create a new variable. In this case, I call mine SQL, and I do that just to keep things simple to indicate that this variable is doing exactly that. It's going to be pulling information from the MySQL database. Now, what's going to be contained within this is actually referred to as a SQL select statement, meaning we are selecting the data from a data table in our MySQL database. This is where we tell the server what data table we're looking for on the database and the names of the columns we want to display. And we're actually using the SQL commands embedded inside of PHP to do this. And these commands hopefully should look familiar from when you were creating your tables and adding content to the columns in MySQL Workbench. Because anytime we hit apply, it showed us some code. Well, that code that appeared, those were SQL statements. That is what we are putting in here. So we're going to type in select. That's exactly what it's doing here, is it's saying go out and select this following information. And now this part is incredibly important. The next part we're going to put in is the names of the columns, and these columns have to match the names of the columns you have defined in the actual table using MySQL Workbench. And we're going to separate them with commas. So in my case, it's first underscore name, last underscore name, and email. And the quotes go around this whole select statement. But we have to say from what table. Now, we capitalize some of these elements not because we have to so much, but because visually this tells us what things things are commands versus what things are the actual data we're pulling out. So select is a command statement, from is a command statement, but first name, last name, and email are column names. So they're all lowercase. And we need to tell it from what table. And my table name was contact_info, and that is the end of it. So what we're saying right here is select the first name, last name, and email columns from the table called contact info. Okay, so that's the first part of what we need to do. But that just says to go out and select it. We need something that's going to actually run the query. So we're going to follow this up with another variable called result. Result is another one kind of like SQL that we're going to be using a lot. And result in this case then uses another PHP predefined function called MySQL I query. This is actually running the true query, and we're saying use the connection. So this is that variable from up here. Use that connection to do so, separated by a comma, and use the information in the variable directly above. So this SQL needs to match this SQL. This is actually going to go and query our database. So now we're almost ready to start displaying things. But just like this if statement up above, where we checked to make sure everything was working, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to enter a couple times, give myself some space, and I'm going to make another comment, which is going to say check to see if access to table was successful or not. We're going to create another if statement, so just like above. And in this case, we're checking to see if there was not a result. So we're using that variable from directly above right here. If there is no result, then do the following. So we're going to open that up with our curly brackets, and we're going to say die, just like above. And we're going to put in a different comment so we know where our process disconnected. Because if it disconnects up here, it says connection failed. Down here, we're going to say access to table failed. And then we're going to concatenate just like before. So we have, I'm going to put a colon there, my quotation marks, period, and we are going to do my SQL I underscore error, leave that blank, and at the very end, we're going to put our semicolon. So that is what's going to happen if it fails. But in this case, we want something to happen if it doesn't fail. So we're going to use else. So this becomes an if-else statement. In between the curly brackets for our else statement is where we're going to echo out what we want to see. In this case, I'm going to start with an echo, and I'm going to put in an H1 so we have a header to this particular page. I'm going to call it Friends of Hobbiton, which is, if you remember the table that I created, it was various characters from the Lord of the Rings. And after this line, I want to create a line break because PHP is going to continue to make this go on, and it's not going to automatically create a return character in the code. This is all just going to show up in the code. And one of the ways that we can do that is we can do a backslash and the letter N. And that's all it means is new line. And then after my quotation marks, I need my semicolon. So that's my first echo statement. So if this is successful, I want it to echo out Friends of Hobbiton. Now the important part is I need to pull some stuff from my database. So to do this, we're going to create a while loop. Now the while loop is like what you saw in the class number 7 lab when we did the conditionals and loops. So the while loop that we're going to be creating is going to be using another predefined PHP function. This one is called MySQL I underscore fetch underscore array. And in this case, the word array is a really important piece because what it's going to do is automatically and behind the scenes create an array out of the data from our database so that we can display it. So let's create this while loop. So we're going to start out with while. And just like any of our loops, we have to put our conditional in here. This conditional, we're going to create a variable called item. And what this item is going to do is it is going to give these different column names in our array something to reference to. So we're going to say item equals, and here's that MySQL I underscore fetch underscore array. And inside of the parentheses right after that, we're going to tell it what we want to make that array out of it. And what we do is we want to make it the array out of our result, which is right up here. And now, Please do not copy this. I'm just going to go down here, still within my PHP. I want to show you what that command is doing. So it's equivalent to saying this as far as what we've been hard coding. It's going to make a two-dimensional array. If you remember from when we did that lab in class 6, that's an array of arrays. So our array would look something like this. That is the first array within the arrays. So after this one, we would have to put a comma, and just out of formatting, I like to hit return and go underneath. So we're going to create the second array. And in this one, it would be Frodo's information. That is our second array. Sorry, we don't need this one. And that means we don't need one of these. Okay, so I'm going to put my comma here. I'm going to type in the word array. So I think you're getting the idea of as far as what it's doing. So this is all the data that we entered into the data table. And we could just go on and on. So that is what this simple little command is doing, is it's saying MySQL fetch array. So create an array out of the data from this result. And this result, if you recall, is up here from our query where we were selecting first name, last name, and email from the contact info table. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this because we don't really need it there. In fact, it's actually just going to cause us some problems if we leave it. So now our while loop has been created. I need to open up that curly bracket because I've been messing around with this. There's already a second here. And I think just to be safe, we should comment this just to say that this closes the while loop. And just so we don't forget, this one closes the else statement. Okay, so inside of our while loop, what are we going to do? In this case, we are going to echo out some stuff. We're going to echo out the name. So we're going to combine our first and last name, and then we're going to echo out the email address. So let's start a paragraph. And in this, we're going to say name, because we just kind of want it to have an introductory part. And I want to make this name strong. So I'm going to go back in and go strong. And if you don't remember, strong means bold. I want a space after this, so I'm going to do a space. Now we need to concatenate in our variable information. Now, if you remember from lab 6, when we did the two-dimensional arrays, we had to put the variable name, in this case item, and follow it by a square bracket. So that is exactly what we're going to do. So I've got my quotation, my period. Now we're going to do item. And instead of doing a numeric location, what I'm going to do is I need to put in quotes the exact name of the column that we are calling out. So in this case, first name. And now I'm going to concatenate. So I'm on the other side of that square bracket. I'm going to put a period. And the reason I am doing this is because we don't want the first and last names to be all squished together. We need a space in between. So this is all I'm doing is I'm concatenating out. I'm putting the quotation mark, a space in between, and then we're going to concatenate back in and we're going to call up the last name. So we do the same thing. So it's item, and then we do our square bracket, quotation marks, and now we call up the last name exactly as that column appears. So I'm just going to type that in here. That is going to be the end of this particular line, but I want to put a line break, like an actual BR tag here. So I need to concatenate out of this again. So I'm going to do a period, the quote. I'm going to go do my BR tag. At the end of this, I am going to put the \n just so it goes on to a new line. I'm actually physically going to hit enter and go on to the new line. And just for consistency, I'm going to tab in a bit so we're right underneath the previous line. And now we're going to put in our email. So I'm going to make that strong as well. Type the word email, and we're going to close out that strong tag, and I'm going to put a space there. So now we're going to do it just like above. We're going to use the email array item. So period, $, item, and then we're going to type in email because that is the particular column that we want. And then that is it. So we're going to concatenate out of this so we can close up our paragraph that we started up on the line prior. So we're going to do a period, quotation marks, and then close that paragraph tag. And because this is the end of our echo statement, we are going to put in a semicolon. And just because we want this to all show up in another line, I'm going to do a backspace N here before the quotations and that semicolon. So this is our while loop. And basically what it means is it's going to keep looping through our table data until it runs out of data to display. I'm going to delete out this content here. We really should need it, but I think for our purposes, this will work. So we're going to go ahead and finish this up. I've already saved it once, so I'm going to do a file save. Now I'm going to go out to FileZilla. Okay, in FileZilla, what I need to do is find where I'm going to put this. So here I am in mine. You are automatically there. I've gone into my DMT475 folder. I need to go on the left-hand side and go find that Lab 9. I'm just going to drag that over. Inside of Lab 9, if you recall, is my contact list and my DB Connect. So what I need to find is this contact list in my browser and see if everything works. So let's take this DMT475 in Lab 9. I'm going to copy that. Remember, my file name is contact-list.php. Let's go to a browser. So here we are in the browser. As you can see, we have the Friends of Hobbiton. There is our H1, followed by name. This was what we put with the strong tags, followed by the first and last name, followed by an email, and then the email address for each one of the people that's listed in our current directory. The really cool thing about databases is we created that while loop that's going to go through all of the records within our data table. Well, so if we were to go into our MySQL workbench and go find our contact info table, we could add another name or a bunch of other names, and they would show up right here on our web page. So let's go take a look at MySQL workbench and add another column of records to our data table to see if it shows up here and how that works. So let's go over. Here we are. I already have it open. Here is my table. I need to click the little one with the table with the lightning bolt because we're going to actually add some content. And I am going to go in here and we're going to add a new one. So I'm going to do Gandalf. And while I know this isn't really his last name, I want this to show up. So we're going to put the gray and we're going to give him an email address. And let's see, myr.org, and I'm going to click apply. There is that SQL statement within our MySQL workbench. So I'm going to click apply. It says it was good. I'm going to click close. There it is. If I go back to my browser now and click refresh, there he shows up. So there is that first name, last name, and the email address. That is the last thing that I needed to cover with this lab. So throughout this, now you've set up your table, you have created the necessary connection PHP, you've accessed the data table, you've displayed it on a page. Now what I encourage you to do is to tackle the extra credit as well, which is worth 5 additional points. I'm asking you to make it so that the email address in your contact list are clickable. This will be using some basic HTML blended into the PHP, just like we've been doing, just like this, to create the necessary link. With that, I wish you good luck. Thank you.